All right. Well, it's 4 o'clock. We have a quorum right now. I'd like to start the meeting, and I'll hand it over to the treasurer to do a quick roll call, and then we'll go over the agenda.
Mr. Brennan.
Here.
Mr. Brown. Here. Mr. Randall.
Here.
Ms. Hudson. Mr. Jordan. Mr. Miller. You have 4. You're good to go.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming in today. I know we had been changing some of the schedules for the Finance Committee. Ms. Knight, thank you very much for making it in today. I appreciate it. Looks like a few other of the units are not in today, but that's okay. We'll move forward anyways. We wanted to add the 4 ex officio members of our bargaining units and our non-bargaining units moving forward. I thought it was very important that we had everyone at the table as we discuss these processes, the finances, the budgets, sort of the different sort of processes we have to go through, explaining our budgetary process. So right now, out of the 4 associations, just Ms. Knight is here then?
That is correct. I had heard from the CEA representative, Mr. Coniglio, and he said he had a reform panel meeting.
Okay.
And I did not hear from the other 2.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll have to reach out to them again and just give them a friendly reminder that they're serving as ex officios. I thought it was all okay. That being said, I want to thank everyone. I know July was an off month, and we are getting into started school already, and we have a very busy year ahead of us. As you know, we've been working really hard in this committee, putting together non-personnel budgets, various capital budgets, and something that we're going to see this year are personnel budgets, something that's another piece of this sort of budget puzzle that we have for Columbus City Schools. So we'll be looking forward to that coming around the corner at some point. I know we had discussed some general timelines. Maybe we can go over that briefly at some point of what we're sort of brainstorming and thinking at some point in the meeting today. But that's sort of what this year what we're going to be sort of looking at. Quite frankly, we're probably going to be doing budgeting at every meeting at some point, whether it's personnel, non-personnel, or capital budgets. It's going to be a pretty crowded year, but that's okay. It's always good to be transparent and accountable when it comes to these processes. I can remember when I first ran for office in 2013, the state had changed the funding formula dramatically, and there was a big bump in the amount of money that Columbus City Schools had, and we were going to levy, and I was running for it. And I can remember the dispatch and people saying, "Oh, you're flush with money. What's going on here?" You fast forward 5 years later, what we've gone through, unfortunately, with the budget reductions after passing a levy and what the state's implications on that. It's a much different narrative. I notice it, in the media. I notice it in the public. People have more of awareness of what those financial underpinnings are, where they come from, and what sort of situation we're in. And again, was another reason why I wanted to get our 4 associations together, because it's complicated. And it's very, very important, though, that we have everyone at the table to discuss this, to keep this conversation going. At today's meeting, today's going to be a very brief meeting. We have our June financial report, and we also have July as well, or just June today? Just June, and we also have a monthly spending plan development and a general fund budget OPU transfer. So it should be a fairly brief meeting, and I will kick it over then if there are any questions about the agenda. If not, I'll kick it over to the treasurer to begin the, well, actually, first, I apologize, item 2. We'll take a look at our minutes that we had at our last meeting, and if we have a motion to approve those minutes.
Move.
A second? Is there a second? Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. All right, our minutes are approved. And now I will kick it over to the treasurer to begin our monthly financial report. Mr. Treasurer.
Okay, thank you very much. This is the final report for fiscal year 18, ending June 30th of 2018. As you said, it'll be fairly quick. Hit some highlights. We ended the year with the same pattern that we've been experiencing throughout the fiscal year, with revenues above expenditures. Total revenues ended about $29 million above plan, which represented a 3.3% variance, and expenditures ended under plan, almost $26 million. So we had an increase in our projected cash balance of $55 million. When we look at revenues, Property taxes came in almost $20 million above plan at about a 4% favorable variance. State aid was within 1% at $3 million over the estimates. The other major line item that had a fairly significant variance at favorable $7 million was other revenues at 30% over 38% over our plan, and again, all in all, we ended up at 3% over plan. I have in the notes an explanation on state aid and some of the items that contributed to that variance, both favorable and unfavorable, as you can see in the explanation. Relative to foundation monies, we actually came in a little bit less than our original estimate, about $1.3 million under, but we did go back and take a look, and we did not specifically account for casino revenue at about $2.5 million and some other adjustments that come through the foundation program at $1.5 million. So all of those worked themselves out, and one kind of offset the other to end up where we were. So we know exactly where those variances are, down to about the remaining $400,000 that were just truly a variance. So as we plan forward, we've made line items specifically for things like the casino revenue and estimates out into the future for that. And so we should be very much on target when we get around to doing our forecast. And a lot of our analysis for the end of June then will play, as you can see, because this will segue right into the monthly spending plan discussion and then on into some assumptions, at least preliminarily, about what we want to do with the 5-year forecast. So as we look at these and we now know where these variances come from this fiscal year, we'll factor that into our future planning. The property tax allocation was right on. All other revenue, I'll tell you that the win-win payments are in this all other revenue line. The property tax cases are in this line, and they're hard to predict. And income revenue, investment income revenue, is in this line, and all of these were coming in above plan. Again, this will be one of the lines we talk about in terms of making adjustments for the forecast in coming years. Are we too conservative? Do we want to maintain that stance? And I am working on the forecast this week so that we get it done in anticipation for the September presentation. But this will certainly feed into it. So other than that, nothing remarkable that we haven't discussed about revenue before. On the expenditure side, personnel ended the year about 2% under, and again, because it's such a large line item, almost $600 million, that 2% represents just under $11 million. So that was a significant contributor to the variances. And then again, charter schools came in under. We've talked about that before with the closure of ECOT and reduction in those deductions for the year. That contributed about $5 million to the favorable variance. And then again, purchase services, supplies, material, and capital outlay netted out to about $5.4 million under plan. Again, a topic for discussion here in a minute as to how do we want to, I guess, say, plan for that in the future. Other than that, nothing really remarkable in terms of variances on the expenditure side, most of which we've talked about throughout the year. I will say in the notes what I did provide you is, back on page 10 of the notes, is a historical look at our budgets, what we spent in the various categories, and where we've been, what the variances have been, either over or under budget. Again, this serves as a basis for what do we want to assume about two things: the spending plan coming up, and then also the 5-year forecast. But as far as the June financial report, that concludes my portion of that. If anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to address those.
The historical budget analysis is a nice tool. Thank you.
Okay.
So when will we see July then?
You'll see July and August together in September.
Okay. Any other questions about the monthly financial?
Okay, so it's kind of a segue off of what Jody mentioned in terms of the historical budget analysis. Several of us have sat in my office, Scott, Mike, me. Eric sticks his head in and offers his suggestions, and a fourth set of eyes on all of this. But what we've done is gone back and looked in the expenditure categories, not from a behavioral standpoint in terms of what we're doing in the buildings and departments, but just from what do the numbers seem to indicate to us, and how do we should that affect how we put together a cash spending plan for the year. So we've got various financial documents out there. We have 2 forecasts, an October and a May. We have an appropriation or a budget document, and then we have this month-to-month spending plan, all at kind of varying degrees of specificity, all serving different purposes. And generally, we've aligned all the numbers up, and then any variances we see in the monthly spending kind of indicate, well, there's something that will be varying with the appropriations or varying in the forecast. What we wanted to look at is, should we modify this monthly cash spending plan to somehow account for some of these variances that we're anticipating. So this is the first look we took. We've got 5 years of data from fiscal year 13 to fiscal year 18, and then as was shown in the notes to the June, we made a comparison of how those expenditures stacked up against the original budget and revised budget shown on the books for each one of those years. And then we just went back in and looked over a 4-year period. I didn't go back and use 13. That was the first year we were on Munis, and in 14, or just right after 14, Scott instituted the new budgeting process. So we thought that would, the latter years would be a better indicator than the former years. But so we did a 4-year average to get an idea of what was going on. And when we looked at the average percent variance from those budgets, admittedly, somewhat arbitrarily, I said, well, if we're going to account for this, we're not going to account for the whole thing necessarily. We don't want to have that kind of a knee-jerk reaction. So I said, well, let's take half of that under budget spend and put it in as a percent of budget that we'd anticipate to spend on a cash basis. So as I gave an example here, so if a line item typically would run 80% under budget, then let's use half of that difference, or 10%, to account for. And so let's take the budget amount and figure that we're going to spend 90% of it on a cash basis and see where that gets us. So just as an example, I pick out some of the large items in purchase services to give you an idea. And as you can see, these are the averages going left to right. You've got the actual expenditures for 18 to give you an idea of the magnitude of these lines. The 4-year average against, or the original budget in terms of percent spent, and then 2 columns over from that, the 4-year average against revised budget. The difference between original and revised: original is where we start the year without any carry forward activity, purchase orders that were encumbered at the end of the year, previous year carrying forward to this year. Revised budget then includes not only those carry forwards, but also any modifications that are made during the year between individual objects. Not all of these changes are board approved because we don't appropriate at the object level. We appropriate at personnel, and then we appropriate at the departmental level in the aggregate. So we don't bring those changes to you. And so sometimes when you see lines that are more than 100% of budget expended, especially on the original side, that has to do with carry forward expenditures being made, and or then on the revised side, some movement amongst the lines. But as we looked at this, we thought, well, what are we going to use? Should we use it against revised or use it against original? And I made the decision to say, well, let's use it against the original budget, because that's what we have right now. It's at the very beginning of the year. It's at least a fixed point in time, and revised budget will vary over the year as folks make budget reallocations. We decided that obviously no line, we would assume we'd spend more than 100% of that line, even though in the past sometimes we do. And we came up with these percentages to use on these particular line items. So you can see that the amount that we're accounting for is not terribly large, but at least it does hone in a little bit better we hope, in terms of what we're actually going to cash spend. On the supply side, we picked out, again, a fewer number of items, but still the large contributors. As you can see here, there's, in supplies, some of the lines were running, in the 80 to 85% under, so we're doing a 90 to 93% kind of a calculation for the spend. So what's that mean for the original budget, and if we do set up a cash spending plan at something less than that? So as I show here, we've got the original budget shown, and then what we had in for the May forecast, and they're very close. They're within a, I think it's, what's that work out to be, about $2 million of each other. So they're essentially the same. And then when we estimate the expenditure for the year on a cash, the cash expenditure based upon that original budget percentage, you can see the differences here. And so for salaries and fringe benefits, essentially we're always so close to the original budget that we're not really going to modify that much. But when you get to purchase service and supplies and materials, you can see that using this percentage, we would actually be adding to the cash balance right up front 3.7 and 1.6, almost $1.7 million. We'd say, look, we know we're going to underspend it, so let's go ahead and put that in the spending plan. And compared to the forecast, we know that we're likely going to add about $5 million to the cash balance by the end of the year. So it just takes some of that variance out of it if we know right now that that's where we're headed. So that's what I put together for a spending plan that we'll show in July and August, that will reflect it against that, unless the committee doesn't want me to do that. But I thought at least here, given the history, we know we're going to do better than that, so let's go ahead and at least factor it into that spending plan. Spending plan is really not a control document. It's just informational and for comparison purposes and to generate a discussion about how we're running. So if we run on plan, very close to plan, then we know, hey, we're going to build the cash balance, at least from an expenditure side, by at least $5 million. If we run further under plan, it's going to be more than that. But just some way to kind of take some of those large variances out of the picture up front, since we know that's probably what's going to happen. So that's kind of that conversation. So as I said, we've got several documents. We started with the May forecast, and in my spending plan for the year, I'm using the revenue in the May forecast. And then we're looking at actual expenditures in the original revised budgets and trying to come up with this monthly spending plan with a slight percentage reduction in what we expect to spend. The question will then be, that we can also talk about now, is do those percentages apply to the forecast? So if you imagine that you add $5 million to this year, if I would apply those same percentages out into the next 4 years of the forecast, then you'd be adding in about a $20 million improvement in cash balance by the end of the forecast. Is that a large number? If it were your personal budget, it's a huge number. On a $900 million budget, it just helps us get a little bit closer to that 30-day cash. It probably won't make a difference necessarily in terms of, quite frankly, something like levy planning, but it could provide us some room to do some things expenditure-wise that we might not otherwise do. So we had the forecast, we've delayed some spending, we now have, when you see the next forecast, if we apply this methodology to it, we could see an improved position that may say, well, look, maybe we can rewind some of that. So it's not a large, this is tweaking, and I just thought I'd throw it out to the committee to see if it's worthwhile and worth the discussion.
I think it is worth the discussion, and here's a real general question. I know we were going through budget reductions. We were looking at a piece of money that we were, pot of money that we were looking at savings, and that was tighten up some of our conservative forecasting that we had forecasted out around 10 or 15 a year, I think is what you said. I forget the exact amount. Is this outside of that?
Can you run that by me one more time?
So when we went through budget reductions, a big piece of it was, look, we are very conservative budgeting.
I'm sorry. Now I remember. This would be inclusive of that.
Okay. Okay.
So when we looked at those reductions and we immediately took a certain variance out, that is in part what this is.
Okay. I think it's really important, actually. I appreciate that we keep on digging into these items, especially in the supplies line item. I think it's a helpful tool. Anything helps. Like you said, it's not much, but it helps us sort of hone in on things. And then as we look at this, we do need to look at behavior. That could be a next step in some of this analysis. So I find it very, very valuable.
And I bring it up so that when we get to the forecast, and I'm not done with it totally yet, but if it appears that the position has improved, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody. It'll just be an explanation that we're just slightly less conservative in our forecasting. So it hasn't been a real change in behavior, except for behavior on our part in terms of putting that forecast together, to just tweak that down a little bit, take a little bit of that favorable variance out, and not be too overly conservative. And again, we're talking about, $20 million in one direction and maybe a like amount on the expenditure side that will add into that forecast. Again, it's just tweaking. And I don't know if you want to speak to anything you're doing budget review-wise, behavior.
Yeah, I'm going to give that. Yeah, because what we're doing is we work with our appropriate budget managers, looking at especially FY18, because we don't want to create alarm with them, because as we dig deeper into this, we don't want to create an issue where it's that use it or lose it type of mentality with these, because any dollars that we save obviously go to improve the overall cash position of the district. But we want to ensure that the dollars that we're requesting are for programs and services that we're doing. So we want to make sure that we're doing what we planned to do when we said we were going to do it. So there may be some instances where we planned to do something, but we got a better price, better quote than what was expected. So we make adjustments on that. Fuel, for example. The estimates for the fuel price per gallon was higher than what came in. I mean, those are good things, and those we can count those towards this piece. But we want to make sure that we're still doing what we said we were going to do. So we do review budget activity with our budget managers every quarter. We've taken a little bit different approach this summer before everybody gets back to look at it and kind of start the year off a little differently, on a different foot of going through everything that's in there up front before the year starts, because we know once the kids come through that door, folks are sprinting. So we want to make sure that we're standing at the door together, from the fiscal side and the academic program side. So we're really digging down into that and changing what our reports look like to make them more meaningful, and working with the various chiefs to make sure that it's not just an exercise of looking at a document and signing off on it, but that they actually understand what it is and how to get into that information, and showing them the type of access they have, so they can really dig down into to actually looking at the invoice if they want to. So we're really working with folks and providing additional professional development and training to make sure that they understand the information that comes into this, because we're looking at such a high level, but they're the ones that on day to day are spending those dollars, and so we need to make sure that it's all aligned.
And part of it, I think, too, is to get them to understand the types of questions that arise here as a result of what all these individual budgets, when they add up, it generates a question here of like, well, what's happening?
Supplies, absolutely.
And so when we go back to them, it's like, help us explain why this doesn't flow the way we think it should, or answer the question, so that we don't think that we're not doing something that we should be, or what is that explanation? What can we rely on? So if they get a better appreciation for that, then we'll have better explanations for you.
Well, and one of the perfect examples that we have on that was in our teaching and learning department, where the original plan was to buy a book, and it was paper, it was physical, it was a supply. Well, instead of getting the in-hand document, we went to an online product. So it went from being a supply to a purchase service. So that would explain some of the transfers. Not that we didn't do it, we just did it in a different way than we had originally intended. So once we talked through that with them, we understood what it was, so then we can answer the questions when it gets here to see, oh wait, purchase services went up, supplies went down. We knew they moved money from those categories to capital, so we can see that and piece it all together for you.
And you've asked the question, and it's the hot topic. It's about it's like supplies in the classroom. It's on the tip of everybody's tongue now. We've got the stuff, the backpack, we've got the crowdfunding issue, we've got all of that, and so how do we mesh that activity with what we're seeing at our level, where there's a several $1 million under budget behavior? Can we align those two? Can we explain that? And that's what we're working on. So part of it will be just at our level, I'm going to assume that we're going to continue to underspend by at least a portion. But then Scott's digging further for that other piece. You know, should we be budgeting different, or should we be spending different? What's the answer to that? So it's all in the process.
And obviously, maybe not a place for the finance committee, but it is, you know, a topic. You know, you hear about supplies a lot, you know, a lot. And as a board member, you know, I am interested in you know, what does a child need for the year when it comes to supplies? And we keep on seeing, you know, this is something you see every single year. And again, it may not be a place for finance, but my mind does wander there. You know, what does a child need? What are they expected to have through the year? You know, what's going there now? What are the differences in the, you know, in the various grade bands? You know, we seem to be running surpluses in these areas. You know, what does that mean, and why is it? I would like to know why. You know, I love doing these drives. All of us have been participating in all these backpack drives and things like that. But it would be nice to know at some point, you know, what does a child need through the year, and what are we able to provide them, and do we have the means to do that? It would be nice, you know, it's great to do all these drives and stuff. It would be, in an ideal world, great to have the school district to be able to provide all these items and resources to the students. And when I see surpluses in these line items, yeah, I'd like to know why we're not, and what they're. But I also know that there's other behavior going on. It's not necessarily as easy and clean as that. So I appreciate it. And this is something that we've been looking at for a long time. You know, you see this category and you think right to supplies in the classroom, but it also has a lot to do with software. It also has to do a lot with fuel. So general supplies is just one piece of that. But I do appreciate that we keep on digging into this. And I saw Maria taking notes at my comment earlier, so I appreciate that. And I think it is a good discussion for us to have. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, you know, this backpack drive has done something interesting, at least for me and probably some others, but going out to actually buy a backpack and buy all the supplies from one of the lists or more gives me better insight on what it is like today to have children in school. And if there's several children and it's 2 or 3 times, and it gets to be real money.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate it. Do we have any other questions on the spending plan? Nothing?
One other comment?
Absolutely.
Backtrack to the financial report, which is sort of a precursor for July and August. You know how we talked about how the tax code changed for 18? We thought people may have prepaid their bills in December. Yeah, they did. We got August settlement, so they did. Now, it might not sound like a lot, but the percentage first half to second half changed by 0.78%. You might not think that's a lot, but it amounted to about $3.5 million. So $3.5 million essentially moved from FY19 back into FY18. And then you have to consider, well, what happened in the previous first half, second half, and then what's going to happen in 19 first half, second half. And I don't know. But when we get to the forecast, I'm assuming an average, that it'll smooth itself out. But as you can see, if you get that going out in the front end and out in the back end, you can have a $7 or $8 million, with that small of a variance, a $7 or $8 million swing in the actual receipts, either way. So in one fiscal year, so when you go from fiscal year to fiscal year, you go, wait a minute, property tax receipts they go up a lot more here than they did over here. Well, it could be that kind of a shift. And since we're working on the forecast, we spent an inordinate amount of time looking at settlement periods and trying to go back and find out, I guess, to say what economic activity was going on in all of these years. When's the property tax update, reappraisal? Was there a tax code change? Why would first half, second half change somewhat? Because I have had previous years where the change has been more than that. It's been like almost 1.2% differential. So we look at that, but in the future, what do? You can't really predict it. So you assume a pretty average split and you go with it. So. That's just a kind of that question had come up, and I thought I'd let you know that it's confirmed. We got the August settlement, and
Yep.
it did shift.
My dollars are in there.
Thank you very much. Thanks for screwing up my forecast.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, fantastic. Thank you very much for
Sure.
this. I appreciate the work that we've been putting into this. This will move on to item 5, general fund budget OPU transfers. As you know, the way that we budget, when we do have transfers over a certain amount from one item to another, it comes before the finance committee generally. So,
On the general fund.
yeah.
And I'm trying to think, we're talk through this with Jordan, because we appropriate differently than I think, than any other district in the state that I can think of. Because legally, we're required to appropriate at the fund level. We still do that with the exception of the general fund. So what we do is we appropriate personnel costs, so salary and fringes is one number, and then the non-personnel, which is our purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, and other, are broken down by OPU, operating unit, so which each number is assigned to a building or a department. In this case, we've got a transfer from OPU 225 to 374, and this is due to the realignment of Columbus Afrocentric K8. So we've taken what was K8 and made it K5 and 6-8. So we took those middle school dollars that were part of the K8 and have now moved it into OPU 374, which is the 6-8 building. So we've got that alignment correct. So there's no increase to the general fund, but we're just moving it from the old K8 and putting the 6-8 dollars with the 6-8 building.
Any other comment on that? Any questions on that? Okay.
So we'll take this to the board next Tuesday.
Absolutely. Well, folks, that's it. That's quick. 4:41. Yes, let's do that.
You want to do that?
Yeah, let's do that real quick.
Paul
So-
will bring up the PDF. I actually have a PDF of this.
So
This is from our discussions about topics that will be coming up. We tried to lay out the timing of when certain things would be presented to FAC, so not only you all would be prepared for the discussion, but staff would be as well. So we'll let Maurice know that he's on the hook for November on that capital budget revisit. There he is. There he is. Surprise!
Oh, Maurice always seems to materialize when we talk about the capital budget. I looked back earlier, he wasn't here. Did we have that emailed out to all members, or you just want to give a hard copy as well?
I have a hard copy here. I can
Just pass them down. So yeah, it's busy. You know, the work of this committee gets busier and busier every year. I think it's important, and you know, I do appreciate everyone's input in this process. Mr. Pahorek, would you be able to, at some point, maybe just give a quick email to some of those folks who didn't respond from the 4 new ex officios? Just double check with them. I know it's a busy time of year. I know Lois has been out visiting schools and doing a lot of things. It's August, obviously, so everyone's going to get prepared. But maybe just a friendly reminder, and make sure, just double check on that would be helpful. Cool.
I'll do that. I'll dock their pay for the...
Yeah. You're patting her paychecks with Finance Committee.
Yeah.
0 times 0.
Well, excellent. Well, you know, I really appreciate that. You know, we are also, we are 1 member short, and we are going to be meeting with a recommendation this Friday. Mr. Baker, if you're available, with a gentleman named Mr. Green, who is Brian Stewart's recommendation. And I apologize for that. I kind of, you know, when the membership of the committee, they cycle in, cycle out. As I became chairman after Mary Jo, I was not thinking about members at all. So I do apologize for not keeping on top of that. We are starting to look at the future with that, and we are looking to add, to fill that vacancy as we move forward. And so we'll have some information to go to the board president. We'll have an internal conversation be available as well. That'd be great on Friday. And look forward to continue to make this committee work. Do we have any other questions at all? I know it was a very brief meeting. I know it's been a while. And anything at all for the committee? All right.
Brief meetings are good.
They are good. Well, with that, if there's a motion to adjourn,
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right.